My son arrived with roses and a calculator. Only one of them was for me. The roses were dark red, grocery store honest, still wrapped in cellophane that squeaked when he shifted them from one hand to the other. The calculator was thin and black, a nervous man's worry stone, and when he set it on my kitchen table, it clicked against the oak with the same tight sound as a breaker snapping open. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know in the comments where you're listening from. It was late autumn, the light coming in at a slant through the maple we planted when my wife, Marta, still wore her hair in a braid. I am David, 62, a retired electrician with strong hands and a drawer full of wire nuts. I like the way a good connection hums when you tighten it right. Nothing hot, nothing loose, no smell of something wanting to burn. Evan had not been to my house since the month we buried his mother. He sent a text instead of coming by. 2 words that landed like a dropped wrench. Take care. Then nothing through winter. Nothing through spring. Once, I thought I saw him on the sidewalk across from the hardware store, but it was another man with the same quick stride and the same eyes that seemed to be forever calculating an exit. Now he stood in my kitchen in late autumn, roses in one hand, calculator in the other, smiling the rueful smile he used as a boy when he'd broken something and needed me to fix it. He talked about traffic. He talked about the chill. He eyed the walls, which I'd repainted in summer, a clean shade of door white that looked good at dawn. We skimmed the surface like men on thin ice, both pretending the water wasn't black and cold under us. You look good, he said. Stronger. I carry my own groceries, I said, and I put in a new line for the basement freezer. Still tinkering, he said, and he laughed as if it were a joke. I set the kettle on the burner and turned the flame up until it licked blue, then calmed it to a steady ring. The roses stood between us on the table like a centerpiece for people who don't know what to say. He didn't touch his tea. He tapped the corner of the calculator against his palm, soft, 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 as if he were sending a code I'd forgotten. When he finally spoke about money, he went straight to the letter. Dad, I've been working on something big. It's moving faster than we thought. I'm here because, well, this is the kind of moment families plan for. Families, I said, and tasted the word. It felt like biting a cherry and finding the stone with a tooth. You came for a loan. He lifted his hands, roses tilting, the calculator flashing a clean 0. A bridge, he said. Not a handout. I've got commitments, but they won't clear until spring. This is a tide moment. The kind of tide you catch, or you're left collecting shells. When he was little, he loved the way I explained current with a garden hose. Water doesn't judge the pipe, I'd say. It goes where the valve tells it to go. His shoulders now were beach straight, and that way men hold themselves when they want to be taller than their fathers. He named numbers as if they were birds. I should recognize. 6 figures, 7, equity like a sunrise, guaranteed returns before summer. He described a founder's showcase at the town hall, investors driving in on a Saturday, a video, a speech, a line about roots. He had a fiancée I'd never met, a woman named Mara who liked linen napkins and could tell Bordeaux from a Barolo in one sip. He said all this like he was reading off a parts list, each item essential, each wire necessary to the light. What do you need from me? I said, not a question so much as the click before the flow. 200, short term, he said, keeping his eyes disciplined on the roses, as if they would nod yes. It's not even about the money, Dad. It's the story, the optics. You stand with me in front of people. We talk about family. Legacy. The line continues. I thought about the months after Marta died, how the house had fallen inward on itself, rooms drifting with the smell of lotion and lavender. I thought about the late-night repair calls I used to take, a woman whispering because her children were sleeping and her kitchen light hissed like a snake. You go, you open it, you see the stupid thing someone did, tape where a connector should be, a bare wire pretending it can behave, and you fix it. You make an honest path for the current. You test, you tighten, you tuck it back in. And you tell the woman to call you if anything else goes wrong. And you drive away through a town where you know almost every switch. I wanted to say, where were you when the house sounded wrong because there was only one set of footsteps? I wanted to say, do you know how quiet a maple's shadow is when there's no one to laugh about it? But I was raised to be wary when other men were angry, and I pushed down what I wanted to spark, and I told him I needed to think. He nodded like a man who'd already allotted me a thinking window. Don't take too long, he said. We're on the cusp. Of what? I said. Of being who we're meant to be, he said. And that phrase, the we, arrived like a cold draft through a crack you thought you'd sealed. We sat a little longer with the kettle sighing and the roses getting comfortable. He looked around at the hooks by the door, where hammers hung in size order. He asked about the town hall, if it still had that old hum in the walls. I told him I wired the stage myself back when the place needed saving, that the breakers would outlast the bricks if someone kept cleaning the dust from their teeth. He leaned forward. Would you? This is nothing, really. Would you run point that day on the AV? Just to make sure. Nothing. Flickers. He was asking me to be a quiet background, the man in black in the wings making someone else's face look right. I'm good at that. Too good, if you ask my younger self who used to think he'd be center stage. I said yes. He smiled with relief so bright it made me feel chosen. He put the roses in my sink. He tucked the calculator into his coat. He hugged me, quick and clean and businesslike, and he smelled like a man who rents cars and reads contracts in bad light. He had forgotten something, though. He had forgotten that I know the weight of a lie by the way it warms a room. A lie pulls current like a space heater on a cheap cord. It makes you listen for the first crackle. After he left, I carried the roses to Marta's photograph and stood them there, with the plastic wrap still on, a bridal shroud. The maple outside was almost bare. In the afternoon, when the light turned copper, I took a walk down to the town hall. Leaves shuffled at my boots. I let myself in the back with the key nobody bothered to ask for when I retired. Dust lifted in little storms when I crossed the stage. I looked at my old breaker panel like you look at a friend's face after a long time and see both what has changed and what could never. Evan had said legacy. He had said the line continues. That night, I pulled out my notebook, the one with smeared fingerprints of solder, and I wrote the words that had been waiting all day. He stopped visiting until he needed money. Then I drew a box around them like a junction that needed opening. I could help him, I thought. I could stand beside him. But not until I knew whether he remembered that power, used wrong, burns houses. It didn't take long to find a crack to slip a wire through. A mutual friend at the diner told me, with the sideways kindness of our town, that the fiancé's parents were coming to see what kind of family Evan came from. I learned that Evan's investor pitch depended on a single promise, that his father believed in him. The promise had a date and a place. It had a stage I had built with my own hands. You can't lay conduit without thinking a few bends ahead. In the morning, I called the hall manager and offered to volunteer for the showcase. He said yes in the way small towns do when an old hand offers steady help. I bought a small camera for rehearsals, the kind nobody notices when it sits on a stool near the back, and I told myself I wanted to get the lighting right. I picked up the roses from Marta's photo, unwrapped them, trimmed the ends, and put them in water with a pinch of sugar. They opened their faces like they'd finally decided my house was worth the trouble. I didn't sleep much after the leaves turned, but men my age waste less time cursing the dark. I made lists. On a yellow pad I wrote 4 lines, left to right like runs of wire. Help with AV, invite him to work beside me, bait him with a small loan, and set a load test for his promises. Nothing grandiose, no cops, no courts, just a series of choices. I learned a long time ago that you can make a liar explain himself to his own face by making him flip his own switch. Evan came by on a gray afternoon with rain at the edges. He carried a portfolio that said moral on the spine and wore a shirt the color of money. I told him I could spot him $5,000 for a week to ease his tide moment, and his relief broke across his face so quickly I felt the sting of it. I offered a sealed envelope with a check. He held it like a sacrament. Then I said, casual as weather, I need a hand before Saturday. The boathouse light is out again. Come by at first light. He paused, almost flinching, the way a man does when a small clause appears that he hadn't read. He put the envelope in his coat. First light? Fall isn't long, I said. We work while the day behaves. He arrived an hour after morning eased in, smelling like someone else's apartment. He wore city shoes that let water in through the seams. We walked the path by the river, dead reeds rattling, and I talked about nothing that mattered until we reached the door. My father built that boathouse, and I kept its bones faithful. I handed Evan the flashlight and the tester. Black to brass, white to silver, green to ground, I said, and smiled so he would think we were playing an old game. He stared at the dead bulb like it had insulted him. He touched the tester and watched it stay dark. Why not hire someone, he said. Because I like doing things with my hands, I said, and because I'm still here. He made a sound I couldn't map. I told Mara we were almost done, he said. This day, the optics. The optics can wait an hour, I said, and stepped aside. He fumbled, decent but impatient, in the way of people who can describe a thing better than they can hold it. I let him struggle just enough to see himself. When he finally asked me, tight-voiced, to show him how, I did. I guided his hand to the right screw, the right pressure, the right order. When the light burned steady, he smiled like a boy and then put the smile away so I couldn't use it against him. We rinsed our hands in the river. He checked his watch and apologized to his watch instead of to me. I have a rehearsal, he said. Investors don't like surprises. Investors hate them, I said. But they love stories. At the hall, the air tasted like sawdust and coffee. The manager waved me to the back, where the control table perched like a ship's bridge, all sliders and small colored lights. It remembered my hands. I coiled cables with the easy twist that keeps them from fighting you. Evan paced the stage like a man measuring his own worth. Mara arrived in a coat that caught the light like water. She offered her hand. We've heard so much, she said. And I listened for the we and tried not to hold it like a sharp thing. They ran the show twice. Evan Slides bragged his way from a rented bedroom to a leased office. He had a paragraph about coming from a town that raised me, that made me feel both seen and harvested. There was a section called Founders' Values. It had a bullet point that read, Family is our first investor. During a pause, I asked the manager to kill the stage wash for a moment so we could see how the subtitles looked in a simpler light, and in that soft dusk, I let my small camera record the room. Nobody hides at rehearsals. People say what they think privately there, like actors dropping lines they never say in front of paying crowds. Evan's friend Toby said, in the way thoughtless men try to be funny, that bringing an old man on stage was genius optics, man. Mara nodded and said, I hope he doesn't ramble about fuses. Evan laughed. He'll do what I ask. He owes me. In the darkness, my jaw moved, but my mouth stayed shut. If a wire could have feelings, it would have felt exactly like that. Tight, hot, waiting to see if someone had planned for the load. I excused myself to the back hallway. I washed my face in the mop sink, the way Marta hated when I did it as a young man. I looked in the mirror over the paper towel dispenser and saw my father's mouth. I heard my own voice, months back, speaking the words that had driven Evan from my porch. It had snowed that day, and he'd wanted me to sell the winter tires because he said they were a sunk cost. I'd said, You'll never be a man I recognize if money is the only language you learn. He had stood on my steps with his breath like smoke and said, I needed you when I was 15 and you told me to stiffen. Don't ask for soft from me now. Then he had turned his back so swift the air moved with him. There it was, the mid-truth I had to carry. I had pushed him from the stage years before he booked it. That night I went home and opened the sealed envelope I'd given him earlier at the kitchen table. I'd written the check to myself, not to tease, to feel the weight of what money can do to a man's palm. I tore it and let the pieces snow into the bin under my sink. Then I opened my laptop, slow as a man learning a new tool, and gathered what I could from the public square where young men brag. Photos of Evan in hotel bars. A clip of him boasting that home is a marketing story. A line he'd posted and deleted in spring. Blood doesn't raise rounds. Teams do. I stitched these into a quiet slideshow with stills of the town hall and the maple tree, and Marta kneeling in our yard, hands dirty, laughing at a joke I can't remember. I put slow captions at the bottom in a plain font. Home is where you return, not where you harvest. I set the hall for one honest test. The panel in the backstage closet had a breaker that buzzed if you loaded both the old coffee urn in the anteroom and the balcony sockets at once. Everyone in the place knew it, but nobody wrote it down. I stacked the urn and a cheap string of bulbs in a single strip and taped a sign that said, "Do not touch." I knew someone would. Saturday came with a clean sky and a wind that announced itself around the building's corners. The morning wore its throat bare, and by afternoon, people were arriving with coats thrown back like capes. I wore my best flannel with a soft collar. Mara's parents shook my hand like they were already forgiving me. I stood at the back like a piece of furniture and made sure the sound slid into the room without corners. They dimmed the house. Evan walked out with his chest high and his words trained. He did well. He was good at a kind of talking that makes men nod. He was better at it than I had ever been. When he reached Founder's Values, my eyes prickled and I lifted my hand a little, as if I could shelter him from something nobody else could see. Then a volunteer plugged in the urn, and the old buzz in the breaker began its famous song. The projector hiccuped. The screen blinked, then darkened, then lit again to something else. The slideshow slid in, quiet and clean. No big reveal, no fireworks. Just home in time in the buoyant spring, standing by the maple with a jumper rope, and then the public line he typed when he was brave and cruel at once. Home is a marketing story. The room made a sound like a tide going out, not gasping, not shocked. Just the sound crowds make when the air moves in a different direction than expected. I let it run for 30 seconds, then gave the signal like a man whose hand had slipped and everything came back to script. Evan swallowed and continued. He never looked to the back where I stood. But he looked to Mara, and her face had pulled tight in that way. People tense their skin to hide what they feel. He finished, and there was applause that was polite about the parts that had suddenly become less true. Afterward, investors said careful things about timing and fit. Mara's father asked me if I had enjoyed doing the lights, as if I were a grandchild. On the landing by the double doors, Evan cornered me in the amber light of early evening. He didn't yell. He never yells. That's not his style. He talked fast and low, numbers like bullets, words like clicks. "What did you do?" he said. "Why would you sabotage?" "I showed one true thing," I said. "You said it. You could say it again." "You made me look like a liar," he said. "You did that on your own," I said, and felt not triumph but the old heaviness of a coil of wire on the shoulder after a long day. He took the roses from the back room where they'd been staged near the gift table and put them in my hands like evidence. "I brought you these," he said. "Isn't that what you wanted? This is the problem with you, Dad. You love the wrong parts of people. You love the past." "The past keeps the lights on," I said. "It remembers where the wires run." He left me standing there, roses in my fist, the stems squeaking. Mara stayed in the doorway, torn between cameras and kindness. When she chose cameras, I didn't hold it against her. People follow light. That night at my kitchen table, I set the calculator down next to Marta's photograph. I pushed its buttons until the display showed 6 zeros. Then I began to add the small days. How many evenings he never came. How many chores I did alone. How many messages went unanswered. I don't know why I did it, except to feel the truth like a weight in my hand. The number didn't mean anything except what it took for me to get there. Morning came slow and stubborn, rain hemming the roof like a tailor you can hear but not see. I made coffee that tasted like an old friend and set the roses aside because they kept trying to mean something. Mid-morning, Evan knocked. He didn't wait for me to invite him in. He walked past, angry in the particular way of men who think they've been outmaneuvered by someone they had counted out. "You had no right," he said. He stood by the sink where his mother used to polish the Cornish wares she got at a yard sale. "You embarrassed me in front of people I needed. You embarrassed yourself," I said. I assisted with the lights. He looked around as if the right insult might be hiding in the cupboards. "I told Mara's parents you were on board. Do you understand what it does when a father undercuts his son? You make me look like a vulture. You stopped visiting until you needed money," I said. "There are fuses that don't know they're blown until someone tries the switch." He leaned his hands on the table, the calculator between them like a tiny black anvil. "I grew up hearing you tell me to be tough, to work, to earn. That's what I've done. I'm here now. Isn't that what counts?" "Showing up when you've done the math isn't the same as showing up," I said. "One is a strategy. The other is love." He made a small, scorned sound. "Love doesn't pay invoices. It keeps the roof from sounding empty," I said. We didn't speak for a long minute. The house made the house sounds, the refrigerator clicking on, the maple ticking against the glass, the faint hum of the hallway thermostat. I thought of the many nights I'd sat in this kitchen listening for Marta's footsteps when she couldn't sleep. I thought of winter mornings when the pipes complained until I coaxed them with a hairdryer like scared animals. "I can still help you," I said, and his head snapped like a dog's toward the word help, "but not with a check to your name." "I don't need advice," he said. "I need money." "You need a story that isn't a lie," I said. "You need to know that when you stand up and say, 'Family is our first investor,' it isn't just a line that sounds good in a microphone. You need to look a man like me in the eye and mean it when nobody's watching." "You talk like a sermon," he said. "I talk like a man who's wired 1,000 rooms and knows which walls hide heat," I said. He sat down, hard. He picked up the calculator and looked at the display for a long time without touching a button. "You know what?" he said, and his voice wore a new honesty, like a shirt that hadn't been broken in. "I told Mara we already had the money. I told the investors you were as good as a signature. I needed it to be true. So I said it was true. That is on me. I waited." This is the part in a repair where you feel the current shift under your hand. He looked at the roses, at the photograph of his mother, and my hands on the table. "I can't take back the months I didn't call," he said. "I can show up now." "That's not how time works," I said, and then, before he could break again, I added, "But it's how people work." He exhaled as if the shape he carried had changed. "What do you want?" he asked. "What is the price of your belief?" "Not a price," I said. "A plan. For both of us." I told him what I had already set in motion while he was building slides. The credit union lady who has watched me balance a pen behind my ear for 30 years had helped me establish a small fund. Not a trust with a lawyer's teeth, just a patient place where money could sit and not tell lies. It had a simple rule that the branch manager could understand without a notebook: monthly deposits into an account for a child with our name. If Evan showed up on the first Saturday of each month, rain or shine, to help me do one tangible thing that a son does for his father, I would double whatever he placed in his own deposit for his future son or daughter. If he didn't show, nothing moved. If he did, we moved together, little by little, toward a kind of wealth that doesn't sound good on a microphone, because it never has to. He looked at me like I told him the river flowed uphill. "That's not investment," he said. "It is," I said. "It's just not the kind you can list under assets on a deck. It won't impress a man in an imported coat, but it will make a room honest. And in the meantime," I added, "I've made a separate donation, in Marta's name, to the adult ed program at the high school." welding, wiring, the trades. For kids like you were, kids who need a door, that's where your mother would have put the money. Not on a runway. In life. He rubbed his forehead like a man fighting a headache caused by a truth. So you did have money. I had money, I said. But not for your tide. For our river. There's a difference. He stood and began to walk the length of the kitchen and back, the way men who cannot change the terms of engagement do before they decide if they will change themselves. He stopped at the photograph of Marta. He touched the edge of the frame with the back of his finger like a boy who thinks glass can register love. She would have hated last night, he said, and laughed short. She would have told me to stop talking like a brochure. She would have, I said, and my throat closed against the words. I thought he might leave. I thought he might slam the door the way he had that winter. Instead, he took the roses and unwrapped them. He found a jar in the cupboard without asking and filled it at the sink. He cut the stems of my kitchen shears, wrong at first, and then better, and he stood them in water like an apology. He sat down again and touched the calculator, 2 fingers, as if it might show him a number that made this all simple. Did you plan the slide? He asked, no anger in it. Just a man asking how another man made a light change. I planned a small correction, I said. I'm not proud of the part that hurt you in front of strangers. I am proud of reminding you that words mean things when rooms get quiet. If I could have taught it without a screen, I would have. He nodded, head moving slowly, like a switch being thrown deliberately instead of slapped. Mara's gone, he said. We had a good story for each other. That's done. I don't know if it's your fault, or mine, or everyone's. He looked up. Maybe that's the tax. We pay for what we power, I said. He laughed, despite himself. You and your metaphors. That one's not a metaphor, I said. That one is exactly true. He stayed into afternoon. We replaced the porch light with a dusk-to-dawn LED that he called tragically practical. He fetched the ladder without being asked. He held it steady while I climbed. He didn't tell me not to fall, because he knew I wouldn't obey. When we were done, he washed the 2 mugs we used, clumsy and earnest, his sleeves wet at the wrists. He dried the counter with the side of his hand, the way I do. He asked if he could see the credit union card that represented the fund, and I showed it to him. He traced Marta's name on it, and said her name quietly, like a wire brushing cloth. He left before dark. He did not ask for money when he went. He said he'd be back the first Saturday to take the gutters. I said they were bad as a tooth. He put on his coat with our weather in it. At the door he stopped, and he said, not to the floor or the wall, but to me, I'm sorry for the quiet. I know, I said. There are things a father is required to accept as received, even when the current has to travel the long way around. He came that first Saturday. He came in good boots and a bad hat. He came the Saturday after that, and the one after that. We didn't talk about investors. We talked about screws and leaves and whether the maple would last another decade. He did the branches with a saw, as if asking the tree to forgive him. He deposited modest bills at the credit union with his name on the receipt. I matched them. The bookkeeper smiled, the smile of someone who gets to be present at a secret repair. This is the place where I should tell you he turned to me one evening in early winter and said, I see it now. And I said, I see it too, and the room filled with light. But men don't turn like that. They bend. They learn not to pull too hard on the wrong wire. They stop rehearsing their lines. After a month, he brought me a photo of himself at 17, the age when a boy's jaw holds both his father's stubbornness and his mother's light. He put it on the refrigerator beside Marta. He didn't say why. On a Saturday near the solstice, we drove out to the cemetery with the bad bouquet water and poured it on the ground where the grass is always greener than you think it has a right to be. We put our hands in our pockets and watched our breath like strange birds. In spring, his showcase climbed from the wreckage of the last one. He did it in a rented room with bare walls and no stage lights. He didn't ask me to run the AV. He started with a line I had not heard from him before. he said. I lost something in autumn and I'm trying to earn it back. He didn't mention me. He didn't have to. He talked about building something useful that was small and honest. People who used to smile with their teeth nodded with their throats instead. He raised a little money, not tide money, stream money, enough to keep the lights on while he decided how to be. One evening in late spring, the kind with salmon light that makes even old siding look loved, he came by without a question and said he'd been approved for a modest line of credit through his company that didn't need me. I tried not to let relief make me unkind. He didn't smell like other people's apartments anymore. He smelled like the kind of man who works at a thing and eats soup when he's tired. At the end of a long Saturday when we replaced the basement outlet by the washer, we sat at the kitchen table where the calculator usually rested. He took it in his hand and handed it back to me. The display read 6 zeros again, the number he'd somehow learned to set when he wanted a clean start. "What's that?" I said. "The count," he said. "Not the debt, the count." I turned the device over. It had a scratch on the back I could swear I put there in 1993 when I dropped it off a ladder. I remembered, with a small ache, that it had been mine. I had given it to him when he left for college. He had returned it now, like a man who understands a tool's first home. There is a final thing. I tell it because stories like this get measured too often in the currency of who won. The revenge, if you insisted on naming it, was not a broken projector or a bruised knight. It was this. I made him hear himself. I made him carry roses without an audience. I insisted on a ledger. You cannot balance with decimal points. I drove a small current through a circuit he thought was dead. It cost me something I can't list. It cost me the illusion that he would return to me as the boy I watched under the maple with a jumper rope. It handed me a man who, on a quiet morning, will stand beside me and hold the ladder without telling me I'm too old to climb it. I switched off the porch light and let the dark settle, trusting my hands to find the way by memory.